Hello humans, it's your host Corey, and this week we're going to talk about addiction. Now, addiction is one of those words that trigger a lot of feelings, and so I want to be absolutely clear what I'm talking about when I refer to addiction, because we all have our own experiences and meanings of that word. And so just to make sure that we're all on the same page, when I use the word addiction, I'm talking about any substance or habit that we rely on in order to deal with terrible feelings or to deal with mental illness or any kind of problems that we're struggling with that we don't have another strategy for. So we rely on these other outlets in order to deal with those feelings or to deal with that circumstance. Now, the key factor here that makes it an addiction, so you're like, am I addicted to something, is who's in control. So if the habit is in control, or if the pattern is in control, or if this reaction is in control. So often when we think of addiction, we're thinking of substances like drugs or alcohol that alter our mindset or alter how we're feeling temporarily, for better or worse, usually with strong repercussions. So for example, if you do a drug, usually when you come down from that drug, you feel horribly. So there's some kind of upfront cost. And so when I use the word addiction, I'm not just talking about substances, I'm talking about any habit or behavior. So for example, I consider my past with bulimia to be addictive. I never was addicted to alcohol, but I would say that I was addicted to codependent relationships. And I'm currently addicted to my phone. And so there is something to be said, and sugar. And so there's something to be said about socially acceptable addictions and not socially acceptable addictions. So for example, there are a lot of negative connotations associated with heroin addiction or some of these harder drugs, cocaine addiction. But even think about that, heroin or cocaine, like when you think of cocaine, you think of like movie stars, or like it's supposed to like more highbrow. When you think of like meth, you think of like a different demographic completely. So even within the drugs, there are these different social kind of views or expectations of the kind of person that would use that drug. And so there's definitely a social component as well of how we view certain substances. But for me, addiction is addiction. And I know someone's going to be like, what are you saying? Meth is as bad as codependent relationships? No, I mean, I guess it depends on how destructive it is to your life, right? There are some people who microdose heroin and their lives are perfectly functional. So I am not an addiction expert. I am not an addiction counselor of any kind. I'm only wanting to share with you my experience of someone who has an addictive personality, who tends to get very fixated on things or obsessive with things, and how I have worked to navigate that obsessive quality or how to do things to combat those addictions in the past. And so it's purely personal experience, not professional help. If you are struggling with addiction, please go see someone who is more qualified to help you than what I have to say. But I will just talk about how when I think of addiction, I want to broaden our scope a bit beyond just the classical assumption that it's drugs or alcohol that you can be addicted to. I think that you can be addicted to any negative coping mechanism. You could even be addicted to your anger. If your anger feels really safe, if it's your way of protecting yourself from other people or from feeling vulnerable, you might be addicted to that, to relying on that in certain situations. And so broaden your mind a little bit beyond drugs and alcohol. And just think of like, what are you relying on that maybe is taking away from your life, detracting from your life more than it's adding to it. And if you can think of something like that, whether it's socially acceptable, such as my current addictions of sugar and phone use, or my previous addictions of codependent relationships, bulimia, eating disorder stuff, those issues, or if it's something much more serious, like much more disruptive, abusive relationships or alcohol or drugs or anything like that. Regardless of how much professional help you may need to work with your addictive patterns, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of how do we untangle ourselves from addiction as someone who's had to break up or distance myself from addiction many times in the past. So again, the clue that you are stuck with an addiction of who is in charge, right? Are you dependent on that? So who's in charge when I'm on my phone? My phone. The algorithm has me. The internet has taken hold. Who is in charge? The algorithm, not me. Or whenever I really need to, binge something, or because I still get a little bingey, right? or I want to, eat a whole bunch of sugar. Who's in charge? The sugar, right? Even though I know that later I'll be super emotional. So me personally, I think I've mentioned this before on the show, but when I have too much sugar, it makes me emotionally unstable. And I know I've had too much sugar because like the next day I will be in tears over absolutely nothing. Like I'll feel really depressed. I'll be really sad. So it's like that's what my crash post sugar looks like, right? My moods become really unstable. I'm sure there are people out there who are enjoying sugar and they are not having violent mood swings, and kudos to you. I'm so happy for you. But for some of us with sensitive brain chemistry, such as myself, we have to really be careful about the things that we ingest and things that we use. And so I am currently trying to break my sugar addiction because I know it's not good for my mental health. When I have too much sugar, I don't feel well emotionally. I feel really unbalanced. I feel really unstable. And that's not good for me. It's not a good look for me. And so I'm working to replace it with other things, to beat it back a little bit. I probably also have a caffeine addiction. The thing there, though, is that I feel symptoms when I come down from caffeine. So, for example, if I don't have coffee or something in the morning, by 2 or 3 o'clock that day, I'm getting like a serious headache. And so I know that my body is addicted to it, but I don't feel that the coffee is in control. For example, like I don't wake up thinking about coffee and I don't obsess about coffee. Like my wife is very sweet and she makes me a coffee every morning. But if she weren't here and she didn't make one, I wouldn't be thinking about it, obsessing about it, wondering how I'm going to get it, like trying to stop everything to like make it happen. And so that's kind of like part of the addiction part, right? It's like how much headspace does it take up? Like how much do you feel like I need this or I won't be okay? I don't feel that way about caffeine, but I can feel that way about sugar. Like if I don't have a dessert, I'm not going to be okay. And it's kind of silly, right? Or like if I don't do some scrolling, or if I don't see who's posted fun things, or if I don't get on there and like catch up on the news or whatever, like I'm not going to be okay. So that's more of like there's that fiending quality, right? Like I need to get to it and I need to do it or something bad's going to happen. And so I think of those more like addictive qualities. So ask yourself, what are you currently addicted to? Like, is it, even if it's socially acceptable or not socially acceptable, like what do you feel like is in control of your thoughts and your behavior and your actions? So that is something that you can use to identify an addiction. And then secondly, like what are the things that you can do to work with that, to lessen its hold on you so that we can switch that power dynamic so that you're the one in control rather than the addiction itself? Like what can we do to interrupt that momentum? So again, I want to clarify that this is not replacement for professional help. Like if you're really struggling with an addiction, if you're really trapped in an addictive pattern, you should see a professional. When I was struggling with bulimia, for example, like I needed professional help. I had a therapist at the time that was helping me like work through what were all the moving pieces associated with that addiction. Like why did I have this eating disorder? What was compelling it? What emotions, strong emotions were coming up that were forcing me to like trigger this reactive pattern, like to do these, because there was like steps in bulimia, right? Like what were the things that were happening that was making me do that? And so sometimes we need that professional help and guidance in order to break that habit. My suggestion is that, at least what I found very helpful personally, was switching from shame to curiosity. And so when you have an addiction of any kind, I think it comes with a lot of built-in shame, right? Like we feel like we're bad people or we're weak people or we're not lovable people if we have an addiction, right? Like strong, successful, happy people aren't addicted. Like there's some narrative there underneath that I think kind of pollutes the experience, or I don't want to say pollutes, complicates the experience of addiction. But the reality is that it's very human to be addicted. Like it's very human to have an addictive reaction or addictive pattern. And I'm sure you can think of plenty of successful people who you have seen in the news where you're like, that person had everything, and yet they were arrested for a DUI, or yet they were doing cocaine and they were found naked in the street, right? Tons of celebrities fit that profile. And so it doesn't mean anything. You're not a worthless person if you're struggling with addiction. You're not a weak person if you're struggling with addiction. It's very human to have this experience of addiction. So switch from shame to thinking you're a bad person, whatever narratives are keeping you stuck, like I'm an awful person, which is probably making you want to do the addictive thing more, because often we're using addictions to cope with bad feelings or bad memories or bad experiences. So if you're thinking terrible things about yourself, as you're thinking terrible things about yourself, you're more likely to go do the addictive thing. So try to interrupt that cycle a little bit by stop saying mean things to yourself about your addiction and get curious about it. Like, what's going on here? Why do I do this? How did I get hooked on this? Why this addiction and not a different kind of addiction? Or just kind of be curious about who you are and how you got here and why was it like this and what's going on. And so just shifting from shame to curiosity will lighten a lot of the burden and make the situation more workable. And so I definitely relied on that, is I had to stop with the internal catastrophizing, the internal shame. I had to stop beating myself up about it in order to build enough space, even just a little bit of space, so that I could start getting free of this situation, so I could start like unlocking my attachment to this addictive pattern. In addition to shifting from this shame mentality to a curiosity mentality in order to lighten things up a little bit, another recommendation that I have is not just looking at your symptoms, like the product of your addiction and trying to alleviate the symptoms, but also go deeper, because everyone's addiction is tied to some kind of coping mechanism. So for example, my mother really relied on alcohol and drugs in order to cover over the PTSD she had from all of the abuse she endured as a child, right? So she remembered everything that happened to her, and so she would have these terrible feelings that would come up, shame or pain or regret or whatever it was, and then she would try to, instead of having different coping mechanisms to work with those feelings, she would try to suppress them or to forget about them through drugs and alcohol, to numb them, to quiet them, right? And so there's a reason why you have an addiction. Like, even if it's just boredom, like you're so bored with your life, or you're so uninspired in your life that you scroll all day or whatever, or you're so overwhelmed, like there's a signal there that there's something else going on, and that's why you're turning to this maladaptive coping strategy. Okay, so start looking at what's really going on beneath the surface. So if thinking with the socially acceptable caffeine or sugar addiction for just this example, if I was only focusing on the symptoms, it would be like, let me take Advil for the headache, for the caffeine headache, let me eat more of this or something, or let me just make the changes in the habits so I don't have sugar in the house, or let me just, instead of switching from coffee, let me downgrade to tea. So it's just like I'm trying to change just the behavior, just kind of the surface thing, which is great. I mean, you don't want to keep doing the thing that's hurting you necessarily, or you definitely want to be the one who gets back in the driver's seat, who gets control again. But what's more important is to figure out what created that issue, right? So for example, with my bulimia, my sugar habits and stuff, I was raised in such a controlling environment. I had a very domineering parent, a very abusive parent, who would not let me breathe, so to speak. Like, everything about me was wrong, everything I did was wrong. It was such a small, narrow space with which to live and to exist as a person. And there was so much control being exerted over me, there was so much rejection being exerted over me, that when I would binge or I would eat a lot of something, like, I felt like I was getting past the rules, right? It's like, I was like, I can do whatever I want, so it was like this very physical reaction to living in a very controlled, domineering space where someone was trying to always make me feel bad about who I am, shame me for who I am, always walking on eggshells, very explosive anger. And that's very common for people who develop this kind of eating disorder. They were struggling with some kind of abuse of power or control. And so I couldn't really heal that eating disorder until I started looking at what made it happen. Like, it was this environment, it's these feelings. And so you have to get very intimate with which aspect of your history or trauma or your present circumstances, maybe your environment, that's creating this pattern. And so don't just focus on the symptoms, like, I'm drinking too much, it's bad, I'm eating too much, it's bad. I have terrible relationships, it's bad. Don't just look at that. What's happening underneath? Like, what's the real story there? Because then you can start trying to heal these different aspects. And again, this is where professional help might be really necessary and important. Working through those, I call it shadow work, or working through that integration, healing those parts of yourself, overcoming it, therapy, whatever you need. That untangling that makes, let's think of it as like a foundation. Like, your addictive pattern has nothing to sit on, right? Like, it's just going to fall apart again because it's got no foundation if you take away all the parts that were kind of holding it in place and like making it favorable, right? You know what I mean? So we really got to get past just the symptomatic, oh, this behavior is bad, let's fix this, let's just not do this behavior. The behavior is just the product of something else. We got to really look at what's going on beneath that. And this kind of leads me to my third point, which is that we really need safety in order to create sustainable change, to break addictions, and to kind of shift how we're interacting with ourselves, our environment, our lives. And so I would say focus on making yourself safe first. So my mother, for example, struggled with addiction all of her life, most of her life. There toward the end, she wasn't using anything anymore, but for the majority of her life, she was struggling with addictions, right? I don't know, I guess she was still smoking. Smoking is an addiction, right? So addiction all her life. But one of the reasons why she was never able to step away from it is because she didn't have that sense of safety and stability. And part of why we develop addiction, a lot of us, is because we do feel unsafe. And whether that is internally unsafe, like our emotional stability is just not present and we feel very, not okay, and so we use these things to, or it's our external environment, which is where, we're around these kind of abusive, not even kind of, very abusive people or chaotic people, and so we don't feel physically safe, and so we cope with our situation or with our environment in these unhealthy ways. Whatever it is, safety is one of the main factors to disengaging from this process of addiction. Now, I think that's one of the reasons why we see certain populations like homeless people struggle with addiction for longer, because they don't have that safety. They don't have those nets in place where they can start making these internal shifts. Like, they're just surviving. They're just trying to get through the day, right? They can't be thinking about things like, let me try not to be addicted. It's like, that's not even an option on the table. They got to eat, they got to find a place to sleep, and so on and so forth. And so even in less dire circumstances, I would ask you to think about, what can you do to create safety for yourself now? Do you need to change where you live? Do you need to change the people that have access to you? Do you need to get more emotional support so that you can start building coping strategies that make you feel internally safe and stable enough to stop using these addictions or relying on these addictions? Like, what safety are you lacking in your life, and what can you do to build it? And then my fourth tip, beyond the safety first, is the working with the momentum. So for me, at least in my experiences with addiction, there's been a lot of, I don't know how I want to describe this, like heat or momentum to the experience of addiction. So stay with my example of bulimia. I would get this urge to do it, and then it was done before I even thought about it. Like, I'd already binged all this food. And, went to the bathroom. I'm not trying to gross anybody out, but if you know what bulimia is, you eat a lot and then you throw up. And so I had already done that. Had bad feeling, binged everything, threw up in seconds. And so it's like I couldn't slow it down, right? It had such force, such momentum. And so anything we can do, and that's true, not just for bulimia, right? But a lot of these addictions, like if you're whatever it is that you're addicted to, we move from trigger to completion so quickly. And so we have to kind of untangle that. And one of the things I used was meditation, or even just this idea of being like a log is something that Pema Chodron has referred to a lot. Pema Chodron is a Buddhist nun, if you aren't familiar with her and her work. So this concept, and I don't think be like a log is hers. I think she got that somewhere else in the Buddhist ideology, in the texts, the ancient texts, ancient wisdom. But this idea of just if you're experiencing a strong emotion of any kind, whether that's an addictive compulsion, whether that's anger, whether that's depression, whether that's sadness, just don't act. Just Just like, make yourself like a log. So imagining the metaphor, the image that they use in this part that I read was like a log in the woods, so if a tree has fallen and it's just lying on the forest floor, it's not doing anything, right? It's absolutely like a log. And you too must be that non-reactive. Now, if your addiction is really strong, you're going to feel like you're dying while you're doing it. You're going to be like, absolutely not, I have to do it or I'm going to die. And that's true. But you just kind of sit in that fire until the urge becomes smaller and smaller. And this is why it takes a really long time to break these addictive patterns. I can't tell you how many months it took for me just lying there with the feeling of, if I don't eat this, I'm going to literally explode. I'm going to, this will be the end of me if I don't eat this whole cake right now. I am not going to make it till tomorrow. Your mind will come up with crazy things to tell you in order to try to get you to do this thing that will make it feel better temporarily. And when you're just like, no, we're not going to do that anymore, it's going to freak out. It's going to be like, what do you mean? It's going to absolutely lose its mind. But you just kind of have to sit with it. So anything you can do to interrupt that momentum, distracting yourself, coming up with another thing like, oh, every time I have the urge to do this, I'm going to do this instead. Or every time I feel compelled to this, I'm literally just going to lay down on the floor for 5 minutes and breathe. Whatever you need to do. Every time this happens, I'm going to call my friend. I have an accountability partner. I'm going to call her and be like, I really want to do this thing right now. Talk me down. Have them do it. Whatever it is that you need to do, but you need a disruptor. You need something that can disrupt the cycle. And I want to be absolutely clear here that you're going to have mixed results with this in the beginning. There'll be a whole chunk of time where you're like, I know I shouldn't do this, and then you're going to do it anyway. That was true. I had decided, okay, I'm not going to be bulimic anymore. I'm not going to do this. And then for another month, I was still doing it. And so, and imagine people who try to stop smoking, for example, or they try to stop sleeping with their ex that they know is toxic or whatever it is. There's a period of time where you've made a decision, but you're still doing the thing you said you weren't going to do. Give yourself a break, okay? That's part of it. That is actually part of the process. Just remain committed and keep trying. Then you'll have a part where it's like you do half of it, right? Or you just get a little bit into the pattern, and then you're like, oh, okay, and then you pull yourself back. You call the person, or you just collapse on the floor and you cry it out, or whatever it is. You do something else. You manage to use your disruptor to interfere with the cycle. And then the third part is where you feel yourself super triggered and you start to it, or you do a little bit, but you don't go any further than that, right? So it's like you're slowly backing it up. At least that was for me when I was breaking any of the habits I have broken, whether it's, oh my gosh, how many addictions have I had over the year? I don't even know anything obsessive I've ever done, but I've walked it back slowly but surely, and it takes time. So you've got to be really patient with yourself, but just ask yourself, do you want this to work? And if the answer is yes, just keep trying. And there will be times where you manage to not do it at all. You get triggered and you don't do anything, and you're like, oh, it's amazing. And you think you've broken the habit and you're super proud of yourself, and then 4 months down the road, a year down the road, something happens and you relapse, you do that thing, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not healed at all, and you beat yourself up about it. These are all things that happen, but you just have to remain committed to continuing to keep yourself because again, remember when I called addiction, it's who's in control, right? So you just continue to be committed to the idea that you're going to be the one in control. So the time that you lose control is going to become smaller and smaller until it's much more rare. So for example, I haven't been bulimic for many years, but every once in a while I get very bingy, and so I'll catch myself doing it, and I'm like, well, we're not going to do that anymore. And so it doesn't look like it does now as it did, 20 years ago, for example. It's not been 20 years, let's say. When I was dealing with bulimia, that was 15 years ago, 16, let's see, 25 to 42, what is that? 17 years ago? 17 years ago. So a height of my bulimia, 17 years ago. It doesn't look like that now. But do I still struggle with eating stuff? Yes, eating has been my worst crutch, the worst thing for me to sort out. I'm very, very recently getting better, and I'm still working on it. So it may be my whole life. My whole life might just be feeding myself well. That might be my lifelong struggle. But I just remain committed and I just keep trying. And when I fall short of what I hope would be the result, I just redo it again. But what we don't want to do is go back to that shame space. Remember what I mentioned at the very beginning, which is like if you feel shame and then you do the thing and it just compounds the process. So we don't want to go back to shame. We want to stay curious about what this is teaching us about ourselves, and we want to stay committed to us being in the power seat rather than at the mercy of the addictive pattern. So the long and short of it is that addiction is something that we rely on because we don't have a better strategy, but you can build a better strategy, and you do that slowly and surely with love and devotion and commitment over time. And you keep shame out of the equation as much as possible. And that's it for today, dear human. I hope you found this episode useful. And if you did, you can write in and tell me, or you can request a different topic for the show. I always love hearing from you guys. Otherwise, I'll be back next time with another episode of A Well Cared For Human. And until then, please take good care of you. They think of addiction. They do think of... I got distracted because I have a very cute... He's staring at me. Look at that. What is this? How do you feel about it? Sorry.